again, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you, Lauren, for pulling the trigger on that one. We are here to talk about risk assessments on this Thursday afternoon in January. Can't believe we're halfway through January already. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to have a couple of state presenters with us this afternoon as well, but a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're probably, as you jump on, please mute yourself so that we've got a nice quiet environment for everybody to present. But if you do have a question or a comment or anything else like that, please utilize the chat, and we'll make sure that we're following up with that on a regular basis. We also will have some time for questions at the end of the presentation as well. Also wanted to make sure that everyone knows that we're recording, and we'll have the slides and the recording available as soon as we get that. Will probably be posted to the website tomorrow afternoon, no later than tomorrow afternoon. Excuse me. Okay, so with no further ado, I think we're good with the welcome. Everybody settle in. Here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about the purpose of the risk assessment, what things ought to be evaluated, using the risk assessment data, so actionable items based on what you've collected. And then after that basic foundation, we're going to turn it over to our two states, at which point I guess I should introduce Melissa Tabb from Pennsylvania and Adrian Angel from the state of Illinois. Those will be our two guest speakers today. So, excuse me, if you would give them your utmost attention when they're on. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and launch right into this foundation for risk assessments. All right, so what are risk assessments? Basically, they just help us to prioritize and measure risks or hazards within agencies or environments or whatever the case might be, right? And there are numerous things that we can take a look at, numerous things that we can consider, but each of these could create possible scenarios within an agency. So risk assessment tools are used to help analyze those hazards and where an agency's level of risk falls, like for instance, high, medium, or low, as well as prioritize how you at the state will address them based on all that information. Unfortunately, nothing out there is going to eliminate risk altogether, but good policies and practices at the state and within the agency itself can really help. Okay. Excuse me. All right, so it's important to recognize that risk assessments are required. So in uniform guidance, and here's the link to where you can find that, 200.332, grant recipients as pass-through entities have to complete a risk assessment. Basically, the language is you've got to evaluate a subrecipient's risk of non-compliance, and you've got to evaluate things like terms and conditions of the subaward, and just to make sure that you're determining the appropriate level of subrecipient monitoring, right? Okay, moving on to frequency requirements. You recall the uniform guidance requires that risk assessments have to be completed to evaluate the subawards, right? But risk assessments are done also to determine who needs to be monitored and the frequency of that monitoring. So we are required in the CSBG Act to monitor on a triennial basis. However, based on the results of your risk assessment, you may choose to monitor an agency more frequently, for instance, annually or whatever. That may be one of the steps that you take to help moderate that risk or to address it. So the risk assessment does a couple of things. It obviously helps identify where to prioritize your resources, which are limited at the state office. But it also helps us to justify why some agencies are monitored more frequently than others, especially if you get challenged on that particular point. Also, questions about your monitoring schedule are included in Section 10 of the state plan, which covers, the state's policies and procedures around, around monitoring, as well as handling corrective actions and addressing fiscal controls. So that's where you'll include your state's 1 or 2 year monitoring schedule, based on results of your risk assessment data. Okay, so risk assessments, and monitoring. How do those two things tie together? I mean, I think we've kind of talked about that a little bit already, but periodic monitoring is required and important to ensure that agencies are spending grant funds appropriately, as well as complying with the terms and conditions of the grant that the grant and the contract that you have. But the extent, frequency, and type of monitoring is going to depend on the results of the risk assessments done by your office. So states should have a policy for monitoring schedules, but these policies should also fulfill and abide by the CSPG Act. So the risk assessment naturally has to come first each year because you've got to develop a monitoring schedule based off the results and the prioritization of the results. Many states choose to do a risk assessment in like November, December, maybe January if their monitoring schedule starts in, if their actual monitoring starts in something like March, April, something like that, so that they've got the time to redo their monitoring schedule for that year and act appropriately based on the information and the results that they get out of the risk assessment. Okay. All right. So just a reminder about some of the requirements that state have around reviews of CAAs. You're required to do the full on-site review of agencies, as we mentioned before, once every 3 years. So you'll want to be make sure that you're tracking when your agency was last monitored, making sure that none of them are falling outside the 3-year window. But even your low risk agencies, the ones that always show up low risk on your risk assessment, still need to be monitored every 3 years. On-site reviews of, newly designated entities after the first year are required as well. So new agencies will automatically end up on your to-do list, again, regardless of their risk assessment score or level, right? And that may be one of the things you consider including in the criteria that you're measuring. And then there are other reviews as appropriate. So things may pop up in the middle of the year or whatever the case might be that may trigger a need for a review. And then there's lastly a prompt follow-up review if a CAA fails to meet goals, standards, and requirements established by the state. So that's if you've got an agency that's got findings, et cetera, that are not being met or that are in the process of being met, all of those things could trigger another follow-up review or a visit. All right, so with that foundational review, I want to pass the baton to Lauren and let her carry us through to the end, and then we'll hand it over to the states to present their tools.
Yeah, Hugh, I don't know if you wanted to answer. There's a question in the chat first about how often risk assessments are required.
Great question, and I should have covered that, but it's required annually, and the reason for that is simply because we get an annual award from OCS. So the risk, because it's an annual award, we have to do that risk assessment annually.
Thanks, Hugh. So now that you know a little bit more about the risk process, let's talk about how it ties to your monitoring process. As you mentioned, there are some federal requirements that impact this. Uniform guidance does provide some guidance on what should be evaluated on your risk. This includes your agency's prior experience, any audit results, new personnel, especially key personnel, executive director, CFOs, and the results of the prior monitoring visit should all be considered when you're looking at your risk assessments. Some other factors to consider is the size and complexity of the grant. So how much money are they getting? Are there large or more complex things that they're doing that make it higher risk? The size of the agency, large versus small, amount of revenues, number of employees, type of community action. So is it a public versus a private? Public typically kind of have a little bit more checks and balances, where a private nonprofit may not have some of those in place. The longevity of the grantee. So again, we mentioned that if it's a new grantee, it has to be monitored, but if it's still within the past 2 years, it may still be something that you want to consider looking and doing a more frequent review of. Grantee management and organizational structure, so internal controls and policies that they have. What are the grant funds intended for the purpose? Is everything well documented and followed, generally speaking? Experience and past performance of the grantee. So again, have there been past problems, prior experience, generally low risk? Fiscal health and practices of the grantee. So do they have a documented policies and procedures related to the grant? Well, document policies and procedures that are documented are typically identify low risk. Audit history of the grantee. Has the grantee had an independent audit? Was there any issues? Typically, if there's none, then it's a lower risk anyways. And then complaints. So has there been any history of complaints from the grantee that should warrant further investigation from the state office? Some simple categories. So financial stability, again, kind of speaking to the size and complexity of the grant, size of the agency, that fiscal health piece, prior spending, cash flow, prior spending of the grants and funds the previous year. Management systems, so type of agency, experience, and longevity, the policies and procedures, internal controls, procurement processes in place, board compliance, so tripartite board, meeting quorums and minutes, are they up to par? Participation experience, what they're doing with Roma or their preferred performance management. Past program performance, CNA's Roma principles or their performance management principles, NPI targets versus actuals, data collection systems, past monitoring, date of last monitoring, as you mentioned, if it's not within the 3 years, you have to go out there and monitor anyways. So keep that in mind. Any fiscal, programmatic, or org standard issues, any type of corrective action that may happen, or disallowed costs. Single audit, the date of that single audit, program findings and changes. Leadership and key staff. Again, we talked about turnover and personnel. Those are key things to look for. Staff development, communication with staff, Roma, staff capacity are all things to consider. Reporting, so timely submissions of those reports, your CAP plans, annual plans, any revisions or corrections of those items. And then again, complaints. So number of complaints, if there are any, type of complaint, resolution and policy for procedures, for complex complaints. So just keep those things in mind too. And then scoring mechanisms. So accurate scoring mechanisms is critical, and every state does it a little different. So risk scoring helps states determine the risk level of the agency from being severe or low. And it will then help you determine how you want to take action. So that monitoring schedule. and or other interventions. So do they need some additional TA? Maybe there's more desk reviews that can happen there to fix a problem before it becomes a big problem. The state scoring mechanism can vary drastically. However, it's just important that you're assessing the impact or the consequences that a risk may have on the agency. That should be defined and determining whether it's a low, medium, or a high risk. It should also assess the quantity versus the qualities of risk. As we mentioned, eliminating risk is impossible. So it's important that states identify what is acceptable level of risk for every circumstance. And to help us kind of walk through their scoring process, we have invited, as you mentioned, some states. So they're going to share what it is they do. High risk areas for CAAs. So as we mentioned earlier, nothing can eliminate risk entirely. Even your highest performing agencies do have some risk associated with them. So these are typically the high risk areas: financial management, so potential fraud or theft, unallowable cost, internal control issues, quality of reporting to the board. So budget was approved to the board, budget to actual reporting, limits of the audit or auditor procurement, governance, so that the board governs process and the functioning of the board, quality of board engagement, are they meeting their quorum, meeting their frequency of meeting requirements, human resources, do they have that personnel policy, the hiring and firing of CEOs or executive directors, contract or at will employees, what's that evaluation process look like, payroll taxes or other withholdings, volunteers for staff. Leadership is another component, so that board and management tone at the top, and that's super important because that's who the board and what happens at the top is what sets what happens and trickles down to the staff. So that's super important. Compliance, ethical behavior, avoiding conflict of interest, things are all areas that are typically high risk for CAAs. So now that you've done your risk assessment, how are you going to respond to it? So for your high to moderate risk agency, that usually includes some type of grantee monitoring or other appropriate responses as you determine at your office. Additional reviews of agency document, so requesting additional financial or programmatic files to help you gain a better understanding of what's happening at the agency may be one way. Modifying future statewide contracts for better controls may be another thing. Perhaps you've identified that agencies struggle with submitting timely reports, and so you have changed your contracts to include a monthly or quarterly submission, or you're also requiring some TNTA. A history of compliance in terms of contracts of the federal award or ability to meet the expected performance goals are all things that you can kind of include with your contracts. And again, that training and technical assistance to the agency, either to the agency or the entire network, because perhaps it's a bigger issue that isn't just happening at one agency and you're finding it that other agencies in your network are also struggling. So using your risk assessment tool. So the risk assessment, again, will help you identify the appropriate level of monitoring that you need to do. So for those that are high to moderate risk, and including the new agencies are approaching that 3-year mark, so don't forget those. Uniform guidance does specify the appropriate levels of that type of monitoring, so keep this in mind. When you're using your risk assessment data, Section E of uniform guidance outlines some of those things and what's required. Providing training and technical assistance is one of those things. Conducting that on-site monitoring is also another one. So be sure to be familiar with uniform guidance and some of the requirements here when it comes to utilizing your risk assessment for your monitoring process. And one thing that we've heard actually from the state management work group as a promising practice was actually sharing out the results of the risk assessment tool and the results to the agencies. So this helps them understand what the state is looking for, but it also helps them know what they're doing well. and it can oftentimes help alleviate any stress because it's never fun being monitored. And so having that insider knowledge of things that the state will be looking at may help make for a smoother monitoring process. Communication is critical. So communicating those results, using one thing to keep in mind is your internal language might not always be appropriate with how you're sharing out those results with your agencies. So just be mindful of that. And it's also important to share with the subrecipients the process and timing of the results. So trying to keep your promises as far as when you'll have those results to them as far as your risk assessment. And with that, I don't see any other questions. Does anyone have questions before we kick it off to our state spotlights for the call? Okay. And with that, then I will pass it on to Melissa Tabb from the great state of Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, yes, my name is Melissa Tabb. I am the Deputy Director at the Center for Community Services in Pennsylvania, where we operate the CSBG grant. Do you have, oh, there you go. So just to give you a little bit of background about Pennsylvania, we have 43 eligible entities. We have 8 public and 35 private nonprofits. And one of those private nonprofits is a limited purpose agency that serves the migrant farm worker population. We get about 32 million in the annual allocation, and our staff size is kind of small. We have 7 full-time folks paid with CSBG funds, and 2 of them actually, I missed changing that when I sent that to Lauren. We have 2 program specialists who are responsible for monitoring all 43 agencies. They split them up among the 2 of them, and so they handle most of the technical assistance and contracting and risk assessment and monitoring for those agencies. We'll flip to the next slide for me. At Pennsylvania, we have a really great cooperation between our office and the state association. I would be remiss if I didn't bring them up in this presentation because they kind of carry a lot of the weight of the other side of things once risk assessment on monitoring are done, and whenever we decide that there's a need for training or other kinds of technical assistance that aren't necessarily CSBG specific that we could offer. We definitely pass that off to our state association, and they do a great job of providing educational and training resources. They are excellent at working with individual agencies on problems that might come up that they need some hand-holding or whatever. And they do a great job of coordinating partnerships within the state, getting out communication, and their annual conference is fabulous. So if you ever get a chance to come to Pennsylvania for the association's conference, it's wonderful. So like I said, though, the state office does all of the training or the technical assistance for CSBG and the risk assessment, the monitoring, the contracting, and all of that stuff. And like I said, we work really closely with the association. Do you want to? Yep, go ahead. So our risk assessment process, we have some really cool tools that I'm going to show you here in a few minutes that we've developed over the last few years. But our process is pretty standard. We're about to start that actually here at the beginning of the year. We do it during the sort of winter months when the weather is bad in Pennsylvania. We do that desk stuff of risk assessment and then establish our monitoring for the spring and summer and fall. So our process, we initially collect information from what we call the agency questionnaire. It's a lot of standard information that they kind of it carries forward every year. We do that within our data collection system, and they just change things as necessary just for us to get a quick picture of what the agency is doing and how things are established and structured. We use that questionnaire, the organizational standards documentation, and reporting data, and some financial information from our contracting office. to respond to the risk assessment questions in the app that we have. And that app then feeds to our CSVG dashboard, which I'll also show you, where points are applied, the scores are established, and we can get a really good picture of trends and a nice layout to present to the agency when we're finished with their risk assessment. Yeah, and then of course we request a plan of correction or improvement and establish a monitoring schedule if it's necessary that we go out. Of course, we stick with the 3-year requirement, but depending on how high their score is, we may go visit in between so that we can offer some more in-person, hands-on technical assistance. Next slide, please. And then our monitoring process, we use the risk assessment to determine whether we need to go on site, and we keep track of our 3-year rule through that process as well. And our program specialists work individually with each agency to find a mutually agreeable time and date. We don't tend to tell them, hey, we're coming out in June, just be ready. We work really closely with the agencies and have a great relationship. So we find that it works well if we can just have that conversation and decide when's a good time for us to come out. And then we have a monitoring template that I'll show you as well that the specialists use to focus on the areas of concern. Do I have another slide? Yes, I do. So the risk-based monitoring, gives you sort of an outline of when we decide we need to go out. When they're at a high level of risk, we're definitely going out to visit. Medium, it sort of depends on whether or not, or where the risks are. If it would benefit them for us to come out on site, then we'll go. But if it's something that we can either refer to the CAP for some training or technical assistance or whatever, we may not go out. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. And of course, low risk, we're probably only going to go out if you're due for your three-year assessment. We organized all of our tools and our app and the risk assessment by the organizational standards. Since that was an already existing sort of layout, we decided to use that and organize all of our things by those categories. So that's something you'll see here. I think that was my last slide. So I'm going to share my screen. And here's my contact information. If you have any questions about anything that we have done or would like to talk about things individually, we're happy to share our stuff. It's just that our app and our dashboard are kind of behind firewalls and we can't share those out that way, but we're happy to have a call. So I'm going to pull that stuff up here. And just give me a second. I think maybe. Okay. Just need to move things so that I can, okay. I'm gonna make you all small. Okay. I imagine this is somewhat hard to see. I'm not sure why it's so small. Anybody know how I can make this bigger?
I believe there should be a view.
There we go.
Yeah.
Found it. Thanks, Adrian. Okay, so this is the sort of the landing page of our app. This is where our program specialists go to fill out the risk assessment. So I've created a little presentation agency because I don't want to mess anything up moving forward since we're so close to starting our risk assessment. So I just made a fake one for you. So you can see that I'm the reviewer for this. We have all of our things organized here. And I've filled it out ahead of time so that it would transfer to the dashboard for us. But you can see that we use a percentage scale or yes or no when we ask our questions. if our agencies are at 100% compliance, of course, that's low risk. That's going to translate to low scores. And that's what we want, right? We also have little places for comments, so that if there's a outlying issue or something we just want to note, that stuff will also transfer. I'll show you here. And I just sort of went through here and just picked things randomly so that when we get to the dashboard, it'll show you all the different features of what we built. We worked really closely with we call him our data guru. His name is Scott. He's not on the call, but he's done a fantastic job of helping us really figure out what we want and how we want to make it work in a streamlined way to make it easier for both us doing the work and for us to communicate it to the agency so that they can understand it well. But as you can see, everything has one of the organizational standards categories sort of assigned to it. Of course, they're not the same questions or whatever as in the organizational standards, but they are things that apply in those same areas that we want to take a look at. So I left those blank on purpose, and I'll show you why in a minute when we get to the dashboard. But we also have a section for overall comments. This is where we note the needing the 3-year monitoring or overall how we feel things are going. We would, put those kinds of things in this. Before I move to the dashboard, are there any questions about the Power App? I can't see the chat, so if there's anything in there.
I
Hi,
don't see any
Melissa, this is-
questions. Oh, sorry, here's one coming in though.
Oh, yep, please.
I was wondering, is this app, was this built by somebody in Pennsylvania government, or is this like a software as service from
No,
an
this was
outside
built.
vendor?
This was built in-house using
Okay.
the Microsoft Power Apps. So anybody
Great.
could do this
Yes.
using
Yes.
this program. Yep.
Okay,
I mean,
That's great.
anybody who knows what they're doing. I couldn't do this.
Great.
I should say that. I know just
Yes.
enough to be dangerous and break things. That's all.
okay. No, that's really great. I'll shoot you an email for
Okay,
afterwards. Thank
awesome.
you.
Absolutely. Okay, if there aren't any more, I'll switch over to the dashboard here. This is also a Microsoft program, Power BI. We use this for a number of other programs that we run, but this was built by the same guy, by Scott, but we have utilized this to kind of lay everything out and give us a good snapshot to see where there are trends, where there are things that we need to take a look at on the whole, as well as it gives us a little bit of a feature to kind of present it to the agency at the end. So you'll see here, I've already got our little presentation agency pulled up, and you can break things out. Maybe, yeah. So we can break things out and see exactly where they received points. I left the presentation agency in a being scored status. So I could show you that there are sort of color codes and things to let us know that we haven't finalized these things. That we're missing a score for organizational standards. It kind of defaults to as many points as possible, and that's not, that's not where we want that to be. But it's letting us know that we haven't scored that yet. We need to go back in and take care of it. That's the only one in the organizational leadership section that needs attention. And then you'll see down here a little further, I need to make this just a tad bit smaller so that I can see. Okay. You'll see there's additional numbers here. There's just some more pieces to this that we have to take care of. And you can go back into the app and do that at any point. See, those are the 3 that I left blank when we were talking about that section. And you'll notice that if these folks got points here, they would be sort of at a medium risk, I believe. Well, I don't have my little chart in front of me and don't have that memorized. So this was just let us know where we're at. We also have a fun little feature that we have done by by category. And I am going to switch the year real fast so that you can see actual results. Not by agency, but by category. We can see that we have organizational standards is a place of high risk for the state. So that's something that we are focusing on this year in cooperation with the CAP, focusing on some more of where the problem areas of organizational standards might be, because that's clearly our biggest risk factor in Pennsylvania. And you can see as we go down, some more of the larger ones are subcontracts. While that's not inherently a problem, we know that the more times money exchanges hands, the riskier it becomes. So while we wouldn't necessarily need to discourage people or agencies from having subcontracts, we want to make sure that those are tight, and that they're monitoring them frequently enough and doing, their due diligence to make sure that that's as little risk as possible. What else do we have here? We have the review status. This lets us know I'm in year 2024. Everybody's score is finalized. That's a little bit for me as a management feature to just make sure that everything is done, that scores are taken care of, all of the questions are answered, that kind of thing. I don't know. I'm hesitant to air anybody's dirty laundry. So I'm going to switch it back to 2020. Okay, there aren't any agencies here. Okay, good. These are the top 5 questions by points. Just some more mechanisms to sort of give us a good picture of what we're dealing with. And then we get down here to the risk report by agency, and hopefully I can sort this and give you your presentation agency. Show you that. And this is the report that we will send to each agency. Whenever we're finished, if this agency had probably at this point or any higher than this, we would probably have a conversation about this together. But if it's a low risk agency, they'll probably just get this along with a letter that says, here's the results of your risk assessment. Here's some areas that you got points, and then and anything we would ask them to do in the meantime, but otherwise let them know that we won't be out this year, that they're doing a decent job. Yeah, so that's our fancy little tools. I did want to show you real quick our monitoring tools. So once risk assessment is over, the things that we use are pretty simple Excel documents to sort of hone in on some more of the things that might have come up in risk assessment. So we have a pretty simple worksheet for that. And we just get into more specific questions about the different organizational standards sections. So this is organized the same way, just to sort of provide that continuity. We also have an individual organizational standards review worksheet, so that when we do the monitoring and we get into the actual documentations that they provide, we can give them some feedback on that as well. And then when we do a client file review when we're on site, we have a simple little worksheet for that as well to let them know what we've looked at and if it meets eligibility and any issues or advice or comments we have about that. So yeah, that's pretty much how we do things in Pennsylvania. Are there any questions I can answer about any of this?
There are a couple questions in the
Oh, cool.
chat. Wilmer basically said, you know, how were the factors and point values developed and assigned to the various areas? That's one question.
Okay.
So
Well,
if you want to start with that.
Yeah, let me answer that real quick. Our point values and things were assigned over the last since about 2019. We've been working on refining this. So whenever we assigned points, we kind of assigned them by importance or risk level. So, for example, organizational standards, they're one of the highest, the places you can receive the highest points because we apply a multiplier. And that multiplier is what determines the level of importance determines the multiplier. So we have multipliers 1 through 3. So if a item is of the utmost importance, sort of like board governance, that they are following the requirements, that's a very high level of points. As you can see here, the max is 45. So we wanted to make sure that those, actually the scores are 1 through 3. And then the multipliers, what decides how important it is. So we multiplied them by level of importance. I don't know if I'm answering your question very well or not, but over the last many years, we've sort of tweaked those back and forth based on our perceived level of risk for an agency and what we know of them and their operations and things like that. Some of them weren't falling out where we would have expected them to based on our overall knowledge of the agency. So we tweaked points, multipliers, and we sort of tweaked the questions that we ask. And that's sort of based on what we feel is most risky. We initially started our risk assessment adventure with weatherization's risk assessment. We used that sort of as a base level to kind of, since they're, you know, somewhat related, we sort of started there and came up with the CSVG equivalents of some of the things that the weatherization was asking. What's the next question?
So the next question is, each year you send this risk assessment by agency to each CSBG agency?
Yes. So well, we perform the risk assessment. So we send this report to them each year by agency.
Once it's been scored, etc. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Got it. The next question is, do you monitor on other items besides org standards?
Yes, absolutely. We just structure it by organizational standards. So the things that we monitor sort of fall under all these same categories. They just are more in-depth questions about how they do things. That stuff came from mostly from the provided risk or monitoring examples like on NASCASP's website.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah. We just organize it by
question.
organizational standard category. That's all.
Yeah, I love that continuity between a number of those. Yeah, between all those tools. I had a question about one of the reports that I saw that listed. This was across the state, so it wasn't by agency, but that highlighted your biggest areas of risk by category. Exactly right. I thought this was really amazing, and I wondered if you. I'm assuming you probably do, but I just thought I'd ask anyway. If you use this to tailor your training and technical assistance for the coming year or whatever the case might be.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So after we do risk assessment every year, we sit down with Beck at the CAP and we talk about what we've found. And this is the first thing that we talk about usually is, you know, where are the agencies getting their points? What are they struggling with this year? And then they can form their risk, their work plans and um, their offerings based on that to a certain extent.
Cool.
Between what we need them to talk about and train on and what the agencies are requesting,
Mhm.
they do a great job of meshing those things together. So we used this this risk assessment to talk to them about what they were planning for 2024, and then we'll use this year's risk assessment to talk about what needs to happen going 2025 and forward.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it's not just
Yeah.
one of the things that I like about it is it's got levels of specificity in here, so it's not just I need to do a presentation on organizational leadership
Yes.
or on board governance. I've got some specific items within there that people are struggling with and some that aren't.
Right.
So it gives me, and it might change from year to year, but
Mhm.
it's really great information for me to develop a plan around. Yeah,
Yes.
I was really impressed.
Yes.
Um,
And we do sit and we do talk about each individual agency with the CAP as well, especially the agencies that are really struggling. We always give them a heads up to say, hey, you know, we did the risk assessment on blah, blah, blah agency. They're really struggling with this. We're going to send them your way. Heads up. Like, this is what we're putting in our monitoring report and our suggestion to reach out to you, just so you know.
well, thanks so much for this.
Yes,
Any
of
other
course.
questions
Anytime.
from the audience?
And I will stop sharing.
Seeing anything else, Lauren? No? Okay. Well, then we will, yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. That's fantastic. I will be getting back in a hold of you and perhaps even getting a hold of Scott to see if we can do something about some of this form or report
You would love
creation.
that. Just let
Yeah,
us know.
yeah.
We're happy
Okay.
to do that. Yep.
Fantastic. All right. Well, then with no further ado, wanting to make sure we give you plenty of time, Adrian, it's all yours. Bring us home.
Oh, yeah, I think I'm just going to go ahead and call my presentation now and just say, do what Melissa's doing. Looks great on that. And I think what you're going to see is there's a lot of similarities between what we're doing here in Illinois and what Melissa is doing there in Pennsylvania as we go through it a little bit. So to give you a little look at what Illinois is, you know, we have an annual allocation of 35.8 million. We have 3 staff that are dedicated to CSBG. But we do have 6 grant management staff that we share with the LIHEAP program. My office has both LIHEAP weatherization and CSBG. So we use shared staff on the grant management side that goes out to perform the well, they do the grant reviews, perform the monitoring, and they play a role in this risk assessment as well. Then we also have, I think we're at 3 fiscal monitors right now. We may just be at 2, but our goal is to be at 3 fiscal monitors. So we have 35 community action agencies that cover our 102 counties. They get about $32.8 million of our funds. We give them about $500,000 in discretionary money for various initiatives that we have, such as TNTA to support performance management systems and for a statewide scholarship program that we run. In addition to our CAAs, we have 3 statewide migrant organizations that help us serve the migrant population, both the seasonal migrant workers and other migrants that are in our area. So we used to have 1, we're up to 3 now. We give them about $450,000, and then we also I believe have a very good relationship with our state association, and we have a grant with them in the neighborhood of $350,000. It's kind of hard for me to dial in exactly how much of it's CSBG until the end of the year. The total grant is just a little bit over 500,000, but weather and LIHEAP also go into that with us. So that's kind of Illinois at a glance on here. So as we move forward, what you'll see is what do we want out of the risk assessment here in Illinois? Obviously, we want to determine that grant risk level. That's why it's called a risk assessment. I think as we go through this and as you look at our risk assessment, what we do, every agency is going to have some sort of risk score. Nobody's going to be completely risk-free. No matter how good of an agency you have, there is some level of risk. However, it's managing that risk and making sure that that risk is within your comfort level. We also use it to develop our monitoring schedules. And just like Melissa said there at the end of hers, we use it to inform our training and technical assistance initiatives to identify where we may need to beef up on things like that. And I think Melissa said this is as well. We use it to identify grantee trends within the specific agency, and I'll show you that here in just a little bit too. The last thing I have in here is we really want our risk assessment to be unbiased as well. One thing I remember when I first started many years ago with a CSBG, we had a grant manager. We would do our risk assessment, and back then it was much different than what it is now. But we had, I think, about the same number of grant managers, and no matter when we did risk assessments, we had one grantee that always would call his agencies. He must have the Cadillac of agencies, and he always gave his agencies a gold star and low risk, no risk. And once he retired and other grant managers started going into those agencies, or we'd switch agencies, we realized that just wasn't the case. And so we've learned from that lesson. And so what we've tried to do is try and make it where when we're setting up our risk assessment and that we're using things that are unbiased and that it well documented, and it's just not taking somebody's word that there's no problems here or there's no problems there. So as we move forward on that, what does our risk assessment process looks like? We have that grant manager complete the risk assessment. Again, they're shared staff with LIHEAP, so while they are trained in CSBG and know CSBG, they're also managing the LIHEAP program and have a lot on their plate. So what they're looking at key CSBG and administrative components, the timeliness, the accuracy of things that they submit, our grantees submit to us. On the CSBG side, they're looking at the community needs assessment, community action plan, org standards, boards, targeting and customer served, grant spending, monitoring reviews. And then they're also looking at monitoring reviews, both from our fiscal office that does their full fiscal monitoring and the CSBG programmatic review. And then in addition, some additional categories such as the capacity at the staff capacity at the agency, their performance management that they use, such as Roma or another one, and succession planning. We find that when agencies are transitioning, a lot of times that's when we really see a change in things. So once the grant manager completes their review, then that grant manager meets with us the regular CSBG program staff, and we discuss each of their agencies line by line on why they were evaluated the way they were, and ask questions and talk to them about the staff. So utilizing risk to inform monitoring. We've got the risk probabilities, so we're using past program evaluations. The current systems are in place at an agency that we know, and then we also look at risk in a couple different ways: the type of risk and the level of risk. So in my estimation, there's two different types of risk. One type of risk is purely based on the CSBG Act for the most part. Those questions such as is a new agency, has that agency been monitored within the 3 years, those kinds of questions. So that's a type of risk as it affects CSBG. Then we also look at, and I get a kick out of calling it this, but we give them a HTD score, which is how they doing score. And that's also a type of risk, and that's looking at truly the risk that that agency is in. So some things such as when was the last time that they were monitored doesn't necessarily apply at the same percentage at that same ratio as for the how they doing score versus the monitoring score on that. So, and then of course on level of risk, we just like Pennsylvania, we've got the high, medium, and the low levels of risk. So, I'm going to get into this just a little bit. I'm going to talk about the form, and then I'll go in and show you exactly how the form works. So in general, a lot of our areas, and we break our areas down. I really like how Pennsylvania broke theirs out by the organizational standards. How we break our risk assessments out is more by the activity that's taking place, and org standards is one of those that we do it. But we look at a variety of things, such as the grant application process, the quarterly reporting process, org standards, things such as that. So, but in a lot of those things, we're looking at, well, the first thing is on the monitoring risk score, we're looking at how long has the grantee operated a CSBG program. In Illinois, if you've had CSBG for 3 years or less, you're automatically going to be considered a high risk, and you're going to be monitored on an annual basis. 4 years or more is a low risk and doesn't really calculate into the formula. The other thing we do here is if you're on a TAP or QIP, that's also going to push you into a high risk and have you monitored on an annual basis so that we can track you. And then the last thing we do is on the date of monitoring. Now, I know that the CSBG Act says 3 years for the monitoring. In our risk assessment, we use 18 months, so about that halfway point. Our goal in Illinois is to try and make sure every agency is monitored at least once every 24 months at the very, very latest. At one time, when we had a little bit more staff and did a little bit better, we were trying to monitor on an annual basis, which I think is ideal, but I realized that due to staff capacity, that's not always feasible. Then we had slipped into went through a period that we were monitoring about every 3 years. And then that little thing called COVID happened. And we realized real quick into COVID that we were quickly falling out of compliance with the number of agencies on that monitoring thing, which had us a little bit uneasy, kind of at the mercy of OCS on what they were going to allowances that they would allow. And so coming out of COVID, we decided that it would be nice to settle on making sure that all of our agencies were monitored within the last 24 months. That way, if there's something that occurs, we have a 1-year window to kind of let that dust settle and before we're really concerned on the monitoring. So anything over an 18 months, we'll consider high risk, which means we need to get out there by the end of this federal fiscal year. Anything less than 18 months would be considered a low risk. So as we move forward here, looking at the timeliness score. So what we're looking at here is all the different documents that they need to submit to us, the grant application, the organizational standards. Our agencies are required to submit quarterly reports that contains stuff for us to look at concerning monitoring, targeting, fiscal management, things such as that. So we're looking at are they submitting the reports on time? This is kind of the point system that we give is kind of a sliding scale from on time to 3 or more weeks late, and the scale is basically in one week in increments. The next thing we look at is the quality. We want to move to the next one. Thanks. And on this, what they submit, does it need to be returned for corrections? So what we're doing is we have a online system that we use that these reports are all submitted to us on. So when we're looking at the quality, we're looking at the report in there, the monitoring tool status history report in stars to see if we had to return it. So we have a sliding scale from no corrections to corrections took more than 2 weeks for after we review it, we send it back to them asking for follow-up. If that takes more than 2 weeks, you know, that would max out. And we have that on 1 week increments. Again, we use this on the grant application, organizational standards, quarterly reports. This timeliness and quality, I think are key because it shows are they being attentive to the requirements of the grant? Are they following through with it? Are on quality wise, are they taking it seriously? Are they submitting us stuff that we can actually work with? We had an agency or 2 agencies in the past that to meet the guidelines, they just submit whatever they had done, and you'd start reviewing it and you get halfway through and the documents would just stop because they hadn't done it yet. So, but they would tell us that they submitted it on time. So, and then we'd return it for errors or whatever. So this is kind of where that kind of stemmed from there. So moving on to the next slide. When we're looking at the application, we're looking again at that tool assessment. We're looking at the org standards 1 through 3, and on these questions, you know, they're a sliding scale based on whether those org standards were met or non met, and those. Well, I get more into that whenever I show you the tool that we use. And based on the review of the CAP, we're needs addressed, and we utilize a monitoring report for that. The next thing we have, the next thing we're looking at on the next slide is the organizational standards. Is mine just slow flipping or? There it goes. And then we're looking on the organizational standards because like Pennsylvania, we think organizational standards are very important. Otherwise, we wouldn't have that in that annual evaluation. So we're looking at what percentage of standards were met. We're utilizing the one of our STARS tools, a D2 report in STARS to show us by agency how much was met. It's a sliding scale also on this from all met to below 60% met in 10% increments is how we judge those. And then how many categories are below 90% satisfactory, looking at those same reports. And we have a sliding scale from none of them were below 90% to 5 or more were below 90%. So as we move to the next slide, we're looking at the quarterly reports. Again, this is where we get a lot of board data from. Does the board have vacancies? If they have vacancies, or have they followed the board vacancy policy memorandum that we have, asking for an extension to fill those vacancies if it's past 90 days. And then we're also based on the review of last year's program, is agency meeting their targets for services and outcomes. So in their scope of work that they submitted with their grant application, as we're looking at it, did they meet their targets that they said they were? We do give them 20% variance before we start deducting points from that. So it's a sliding scale from 20% off to 50% or more off in meeting targeting on that. Again, staying on the quarterly reports, we're looking at the characteristics report that they submit to us quarterly for CSBG activities only to ensure that they're not serving individuals over 200% of poverty. This shows us whether they're following the CSBG rules. We don't have a whole lot of rules here in Illinois on CSBG, but obviously that 200% of poverty is a federal rule that we do watch. We were looking at how much of their grant are they using for administrative uses. And we have a sliding scale from 10% to greater than 17% 17%. Here in Illinois, we have a 16% soft cap right now. We're about to change that. And this is kind of a lower rate. What we found is as we look back over the years at agencies that have higher admin rates, we found that they're at a greater risk a lot of times for struggling moving forward. So that's why we look at that. Moving on to the next slide, also on quarterly reports, we're looking at how much money. So we do 12 months grants, and we carry over all the unspent funds from one year to the second year. So they only have one grant going at a time. So what we're looking at is how much of that grant are they expending in the first year of the 2-year life, and how much of it are they pushing to the last year that they have. So again, we use a sliding scale on here of 10% being okay to carry over, and an arbitrary number of about 17%, that once we get over 17%, a little bit concerned about their ability to expend the dollars on the customers within their service area. We also look at how frequently are they requesting cash. Our grant agreements we have with them says they have to request cash no less than every 90 days. But we also find that agencies who are requesting it multiple times a month seem to have stronger fiscal officers, and those that are just requesting cash on a quarterly basis a lot of times are more apt to be doing Peter to pay Paul principles, and whoever the next one up in line for the cash request is, that's who's paying the bills then, and causes some issues there. So we utilize the average number of draws that they've taken over the past 12 months. So moving to the next slide, we're looking at the monitoring reviews from the last monitoring, both on the programmatic side and the fiscal side. We're looking to see if they had any findings or observations. Multiple findings if are the 3 options that we have there. Does most recent fiscal monitoring indicate disallowed cost? And again, that's also a sliding scale from no disallowed cost to disallowed cost over $15,000, and I'll show you more into that as we look at the tool. Moving on to the other additional criteria, we're looking at longevity of staff members in key positions. So the executive director, CFO, CSBG coordinator, those types of positions, and we're using that based on the GM knowledge of the agency, but it's kind of more factually based than just whatever. We're looking, does agency have a certified Roma professional? I think since I've created this slide a few years ago, we've added or performance management or other performance management professional. So making sure that we're utilizing some sort of performance management system within the agency. Again, going off of standard 4.5, we're looking to see if the agency has a good succession plan in place. So we review their succession plan, and we're also looking at their annual audit and seeing if all prior findings have been addressed. And that's, again, we refer back to standard 8.2 on that one. So as we move on to the completion of the assessment, what we do is we come up with 3 different risk score, or 3 different scores. One is a score on the timeliness of them being responsive to us. One, the quality of the work that they're doing, and then finally the administrative score. And depending on which one of the risk scores we're working on, those are weighted different for us, so that we can truly get both a score to help determine monitoring and a score to determine how they doing. So the 2 separate risk scores we develop are a monitoring risk score and the how they doing score. The scores are then listed on a summary sheet, and the how they doing score is kind of normalized in a manner that We look at what the average score was amongst the 35 agencies and assign them a 50, and based on how everybody else's scores look, they go up from 50 or down from 50, so that we can kind of normalize that, which to us helps us see, okay, this score is performing better than 75% of their peers, or this agency is down in the bottom 25% of the peers. And it's a lot easier for me to be able to see that than looking at just a risk score that's kind of, hard to tell what that score actually means unless you're looking at it in context of everybody's score, I think. As we move on to and this is kind of a duplication of one of the earlier slides. What do we want out of the risk assessment? So I said we want to determine the grantee risk level. So we do that by normalizing that how they doing score, and it shows the risk of a grantee compared to the average grantee. Development of monitoring schedules. We have a monitoring score, and we give them a high risk, medium risk, and low risk. The high risk will be monitored by the end of the federal fiscal year that we're in. Medium risk is monitored within the next 18 months, and low risk will be monitored sometime within the 24 months. With us having that question about when was the last time you were monitored, and that being at 18 months, that's automatically going to trigger low risk up into that high risk score whenever we're looking at that monitoring score. So it works out very well for us. To inform our training and technical assistance initiative. So we don't have a fancy, and I really liked Melissa's fancy dashboard to show this, but what we have to do is we do go through each of the risk assessments from each agency and make notes on where we see a pattern of multiple agencies having a lower risk score or a higher risk score, depending on how you want to look at it in a certain area. And so we're looking at that to help inform our monitoring or our training. And then much like Pennsylvania, we work with our state association on those trainings, identify what trainings the state association is going to address, what training we're going to address, what training we're going to address together, and things such as that. And then the last thing we do with it is we identify grantee trends. We compare the scores from previous years, and we have discussions for what occurred to cause the changes. And to be preemptive for, I think it was Wilmer's question about how we came up with the values that we have in our score. So this is really the third year we've been dialed into what we're doing now. And as we were preparing to do our risk assessments this year, we kind of gave some arbitrary scores and arbitrary values on what Donna Henry and myself kind of Donna is my assistant program manager, and probably the brains of the operation, to be honest. So Donna and I sat down and gave kind of some arbitrary numbers, and then we went through agencies that we knew that were good to see how those numbers came out, and we went through agencies that we know that had many opportunities for improvement to see how those numbers came out, and then we went through to adjust it many years ago to try and make sure that it was reflecting the way that it was. How it looked compared to what we actually knew at the time. And so each year we do review it to see if we need to make any changes. We haven't really made any changes to the scores in the last 2 years. However, next year, I think what we're going to do, and by think, I know what we're going to do, we just haven't figured out how to do it yet. We're going to add a section to the risk assessment on participation in training activities by the grantee, because we feel that agencies that aren't attending our trainings or the state association trainings are at greater risk for falling out of compliance with the grant. So we're in the process of trying to figure out how exactly to incorporate that into our risk assessment. So that's it on the presentation portion, but I do have my my tool that I'll share with you, and I'll go through and show you how to do it. Are there any questions before I do this? While I'm trying to figure out how to share.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but there might be folks in the audience who want to ask Adrian a question while you got the opportunity.
All righty. So here we have, and I assume you can see, or hoping you can see, my Excel spreadsheet that we have. So we don't have a fancy data person. We just have me. And about my limitations are Excel spreadsheets. I was getting good at Power BI, but then the state didn't want to pay for me to have access to Power BI, so I lost that ability. So I learned how to do a lot of this stuff on spreadsheets. So what we do is for each of our agencies, you can see down at the bottom of the spreadsheet, each of our agencies have a tab that whoops, that is not what I wanted to do. Have a tab that for themselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go. Oh, that is, I can't figure out how to. Got something in the way here of my tabs. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I am going to start with, there it goes. I'm just going to start with the sample agency that I have here to show you how we go through it. So ours is real similar to Melissa's in the sense that it's drop-down boxes. So I can choose my agency name that I have here, and I'll pop in who the executive director is automatically, and then we can free type in the date that we're doing the risk assessment. So the first question we have, the first two questions we have concern the monitoring risk score. How long has the grantee operated the program? And in our drop down, we have 3 grant cycles or less, 4 grant cycles or more. If I select the 3, it's automatically going to make that risk score to be high risk. If I select 4 or more, it won't. And again, is it on a tap or equip? We just say no. So when we look at the grant application review, we're looking at was the grant received on time? We use drop-down scores for on time, less than a week late, 1 to 2 weeks late, greater than 2 weeks late. We're looking at if it needs corrections, no corrections, corrections required and completed within a week, corrections required and completed within 2 weeks, and then corrections required took more than 2 weeks. We're looking at the community needs assessment to see if what mechanisms were utilized to gather data to measure the community needs assessment. And you know, on that, we used how they scored on their most recent organizational standards review, where organizational standards category 1 through 3 all met, were 1 or 2 unmet, greater than 3 unmet. Based on the review of the community action plan, where the top 10 community needs addressed, and we have we have it going from 10 all the way down to 5 on that. We look at our organizational standards reviews based on again, the first 2 questions here are also that was it submitted on time and how the quality of the submittal. The last 2 questions concern the percentage of standards that were considered to be met, and you can see you can select whatever percentage it would be. We get that percentage by running a report in our system that we use to monitor the organizational standards. Same with this 90%. We can see on that. I guess I should be answering some of these questions just so you can see how the score pops in. So on quarterly reports, it's a timeliness and quality again. And actually I just, so it's that, timeliness and quality score that we have there and again, the quality of the submittal, that they submit. I should have done like, Melissa did and, pre-filled this out, but my haste, I thought it would be cool to show you how we can just easily pick these things. Then we're looking at review on board documents. Does the board have any vacancies? And this ties into the admin score on it. And is there clear evidence of maximum participation by board members? So our boards on a quarterly basis, or our agencies on a quarterly basis, submit all the board minutes that they had, showing whether there was a quorum or that. So we go all the way from board minutes are detailed in each meeting. There is a quorum, program fiscal reports, discussion, and resolution on issues, down to board minutes are detailed but not indicate if quorums were present. Minutes are generic, lacking any detail. Board doesn't have a quorum at least once a quarter. Upon review of work programs, how are they doing on their targeting? So this shows us, this will show us whether they're actually taking their time when they're completing the scope of work and doing what they're trying to be thoughtful on how many people they're serving a year and that serving people over 200%. We do making sure that they're following those standards. The carryover, how much funds that they carried over, what was the carryover, or that first one was administrative. How much funds are they spending administratively? How much are they carrying over from year to year? Upon review of their request, how frequently are they requesting cash? We like to see it at least monthly is what we really would like to see. Enter date of the last CSBG monitoring. So if I say it was last monitored on 1/25 of 2024, and then I've got that date in there and I can say that's less than 18 months ago. If it's greater than 18 months, it's automatically going to make it high risk monitoring. As a result of the most recent program monitoring, does the monitoring tool or letter identify any findings? I'll just say no on that. The fiscal, were there any disallowed costs? And I'll say there was some under $5,000. How do they have the staff that they need? We'll say more than 2 key staff in the last 3 years. Roma, we've got multiple Roma or other similar certified professionals on staff. 1 Roma. Organizational standards, again, it ties to that and follows how we do that. So you can see we have a timeliness score of 2.08. The closer to 0 we are, the better we are. A quality score of 48.3. This tells me they're submitting things on time, but it's a pretty low quality of work that they're submitting. And it gives us a administrative score of 33.57. So when we're looking at the monitoring risk, we're going almost straight off the administrative score on that. If I were to go back up here and select this one, you'll see that if I say it's greater than 18 months, you'll see that it automatically goes to 100 on the monitoring score also. The how you doing score is figures in the timeliness and the quality score on it. So as I go back, the only fancy thing I have is it gives me a little chart to look at that shows where we're at on it. So once we complete this, these numbers and there's also a meeting comments. So when the program manager meets, and also we want the grant manager to identify whether they agree with the assessment or disagree with assessment that needs to get changed to high or medium to low for whatever reason, we have to have comments if we make any of those things. We do have the capability to have a risk score adjustment in case there is something going on. But again, if we adjust the score at all, we have to have comments on why we adjusted the score. So these come over into the summary where I can see the base score in the how they doing score, and then the how it was adjusted, and then what their monitoring score was. And then in our last column, we have whether it's to be monitored or not. It does show me the data of the last monitoring. What we do is we try and have about a third of our agencies listed as high or as being monitored, definitely being monitored within the next year. And then we encourage our grant managers, as time permits, to go by the monitoring score, and if they have a chance to monitor some of the other higher ones, to go ahead and do that. So you'll see ones down here that we've identified as needing monitoring, even though their score is a little bit lower, and that's because if they're not monitored this year, they're definitely going to hit the high monitoring for that 18 months by next year. The final thing that we do on this, so that's how we determine, and all the comments come over on here where we can see it. The final thing we've got here is I bring in the last, right now we've been using this for the last 3 years, and I can see the trends. So for example, whenever I look at a 2-year trend and I show this from highest to lowest, we can see this agency 3 years ago was on a 34.08. They were actually on a QIP at that time, and we worked through them on the QIP, and now this most recent score that we did, they're up to a 67.72. So we can see that they've moved in a positive direction, 33.64. Kind of what I like to see, especially if it's a decent agency, is these agencies that are plus or minus 5%. They're staying about the same from year to year. There's not a whole lot of difference in what they're doing. I can tell you the second year we did something a little bit different with the monitoring scores that didn't translate very good on the how they doing. So this tells me these agencies are about the same as they were 2-3 years ago. They're about performing at about the same level. Now this agency down here, the score has continually declined. You know, we were able, and they're actually on a QIP now, but we were actually able to start identifying this decline last year that they were having to be able to start trying to do some interventions before the bottom just really dropped out of it. So we can use this as we're working on it, that identify agencies that are trending in the wrong way. So that's how we do it. All the agencies' names are over here. I've got blacked out just not to air anybody's dirty laundry. We also look at who the grant manager is assigned, and we kind of look at that a little bit to try and keep one individual from just having all the crummy agencies, and another individual having all the cakewalk agencies. You know, that helps us kind of do that. So that's how we do our risk assessment. We also do share, and what we do is we just do a PDF print from each agency's tab, and we email that to the agency and let them know if they what risk level they're on. They can see right there, and we let them know in the email that anybody with a monitoring risk score above this is definitely getting monitored on this year. So I think that's all I've got.
Well, that was a lot, Adrian. That was great. I appreciate you walking through the detail of how you approach your risk assessment and what you do with it. There is a question in the chat from Amy about when staff are completing the risk assessments, are they finding information from meeting minutes somewhere that was recorded?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's what they're looking, when they're looking at board participation, they're reading the minutes and making sure that they're detailed enough that we can see that activities are taking place. So it's a written copy of the meeting minutes is what they're looking for at on that. Somebody from OCS a long time ago when we were monitored, I think back in 2014, basically told me if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And so that's why we think it's important to have that backup, that minute meetings being detailed enough that if somebody from OCS comes to monitor us and chooses that agency, that OCS will be satisfied that there's maximum feasible participation from the board members.
Very good. Any other questions from the audience for Adrian and or Melissa before we wrap up? Trying to be conscious of time. Okay, not hearing any. Lauren, you want to take us? Thanks so much, Adrian. Lauren, you want to take us to the end?
Sure. So we do have some resources. As I mentioned, the State Management Work Group did some really great things on risk assessment and monitoring. So be sure to check out the State Management Work Group webpage. We do have several peer risk assessment tools on the member portal. Adrian's is one of those. Unfortunately, because Pennsylvania's is fancy dancy, we don't have access to that, but there are tons of other really good risk assessment tools there. And then we do have the IAM pertaining to risk assessments. So, and then with that, and I'll throw a link in the chat for the survey, we'd love your feedback. If we do share this information with OCS, this is a grant funded webinar for you all today. And so your feedback helps us know what we can improve upon and lets OCS know that we're doing a good job too. So please take a moment and either scan the QR code or click the link that I just added in the chat and share your feedback with us.
And we will share that link via email with the participant list if you're not able to do that before jumping off the call. So we'll get you one way or the other. But let's a virtual round of applause for Melissa and Adrian. They did a phenomenal job, and that's a lot of detail to cover. So a lot of fantastic work. I can hear it. I can hear it. Can you hear it, Lauren? Yeah.
I can hear it too.
Yeah. Thank you.
10 people.
Thank you both so much. That was fantastic. I certainly appreciate your time. I'd love it if you could stay on the call a little bit longer, but if you can't, Adrian and Melissa, totally understand, but I would like to pick your brain if that's possible.